George Sandoval is a research data analyst at UC Davis Centers for Violence Prevention. He holds dual master's degrees from Arizona State University in film and media studies and criminal justice. Sandoval combines feminist criminology and media studies to examine the intersections of race, gender, sexuality, and violence in the media through an interdisciplinary lens. So thank you so much for joining us, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Bridget, and I'll go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Wonderful. Hello, and thank you for being here today. My name is George Sandoval, and my presentation is entitled Intersectionality in Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire, How Race, Gender, Sexuality, and Violence Intersect in AMC's television adaptation. AMC's Interview with the Vampire tells a familiar story, but through the lens of an early 20th century interracial vampire family in New Orleans with two dads and their daughter Claudia. The cliched racial, sexual, and gender power dynamics of classic vampire depictions on screen become strikingly insufficient for conveying complex intersectional themes and characterizations. This is possible because television adaptations of book remakes, reboots, and spin-offs of intellectual properties are in high demand, which presents an opportunity to be faithful to the original source, while also allowing for diverse and inclusive casting and storytelling. As a caution, this presentation deals with violent themes such as homicide, intimate partner violence, and family annihilation, and contains graphic images of fictional violence. Here's a brief overview of what I hope to cover in my presentation. I'll start by talking about gender, then sexuality, and then race, although you'll see that there is a lot of intersection between these themes throughout. When Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire was first adapted to screens in 1994, Hollywood was a queer-phobic industry, which preferred queer actors stay in the closet and often cast heterosexual actors to portray the few queer or queer-coded roles that existed. Gay characters were often portrayed one-dimensionally, and as Fajes says, desexed and without desire. This means that a major Hollywood film production, like Interview, which starred Tom Cruise as Lestat and Brad Pitt as Louis, had to avoid the clear homoerotic innuendos and connotations in Rice's source material that Haggerty says can only be understood in terms of male-male desire. In contrast, AMC's television production of Anne Rice's Interview wisely leans into the queer relationship between Lestat and Louis, portrayed by Sam Reed and Jacob Anderson, respectively. Therefore, in hindsight, the film adaptation of Interview is a problematic example of queerbaiting, while the recent television adaptation's decision to lean heavily into queer romantic relationships allows audiences to understand the motives and desires of Anne Rice's queer characters more fully. According to Linda Steiner, feminist media theory should consider gender and how it intersects with other dimensions of identity, such as race, class, ability, nationhood, and sexual orientation, as well as with the relations of subordination or domination that these categories carry along. This framework provides a useful context for viewing media like AMC's Interview with the Vampire series. Once all the members of this highly dysfunctional family of vampires are in place, the story truly begins to subvert gender norms in intersectional and terrifying ways. In this section, Claudia's gendered pathway to serial killing is explored. Then the gender dynamics of intimate partner violence in a queer relationship are discussed in the context of Lestat and Louis' fight. In the closing moments of episode 4, Claudia reads a passage from her diary and describes herself as a girl who died in a fire but came back by the blood magic of two demons, was being raised to kill like her parents did, so she could stay in the same flat-chested, hairless-crotched 14-year-old baby doll body as her mind and spirit grew older. Eventually, Claudia embraces the strength and power that comes with being a vampire. As a poor black girl in New Orleans in the 1920s, Claudia could never have imagined that one day she would be adopted into a wealthy family of apex predators in a world filled with prey. She selects her victims because she wants them and does not bother to consider if their death will have consequences. For example, the local policeman who was patrolling the streets at night became her next victim. In episode 5, Claudia runs away from home because she is tired of vampire rules and etiquette in the home. Soon, she has left a trail of bodies behind that gains lots of attention from police and newspapers, who label it the work of a serial killer. According to Wilson and Yardley, women are often excluded from discussions about serial killers because they rarely kill their victims in rapid succession, prefer to poison their victims instead of more bloody forms of violence, and they typically kill people they know, not strangers. However, these gendered characteristics of female serial killers fail to apply to Interview's Claudia. She kills daily, usually targets strangers, and the only time she poisons someone is when she attempts to murder Lestat in episode 7, a conspiracy carried out with Louis' cooperation, which speaks more to Louis' gender-defying use of poison, not Claudia's. For Louis, like some people in a domestically violent relationship with a much stronger partner, the only way out is to kill, and an effective method is poisoning because it does not require a lot of physical strength to carry out. Lestat does not leave him with a choice, saying these words during a brutal fight that ends with his dropping Louis from miles above the ground, shattering him in more ways than one. He says, "I fought myself a million times, fought my nature, controlled my temper. I never once harmed you. I chose you. I have waited, Louis. I have patiently waited in vain for you to love me as I love you." Then, when Louis begs him to let go, Lestat drops him into a free fall below. In this toxic relationship, Lestat resents the familial love between Louis and Claudia and wants Louis all to himself. Lestat's rage and behavior is reminiscent of men who eventually killed their families and kids in an act of family annihilation, one of the most extreme forms of gender-based violence, often triggered by threats to a man's masculinity, pride, or status. The breakdown of family is the primary motivator of family annihilators, which was a key factor for Lestat as well. Claudia manages, though, to stay 5 steps ahead of Lestat and uses his pride and vanity against him, tricking him into drinking not 2, but 3 potentially poisoned humans, ensuring her chances of success. She then finishes Lestat off with a knife to the throat, letting him bleed out, and with it, his power over Claudia and Louis. According to Doty, queer readings of popular culture are not flights of fancy or wishful thinking because queerness has been there the whole time. This is especially true of novels like Anne Rice's Interview, which had clear homoerotic subtext. Hollywood's queerphobia also reinforced queer invisibility in the 1990s and often depicted queer characters as loveless and desexualized. Consequently, when it came to adapting Interview for the big screen, changes to the queer relationship between Lestat and Louis were made. What is interesting is that even back in the 90s, scholars were calling out the film's erasure of gay characters and subplots. Despite the studio's efforts to scrub the film of its homoeroticism, queer readings of it would not die. I argue that the film was guilty of queerbaiting audiences because, as Franklin writes, it was deliberately placing hints that certain characters may be queer specifically to gain the interest of queer audiences with no intention to deliver on this promise. In retrospect, chances were slim, though, that 2 leading men in Hollywood would jeopardize their careers to push for a more faithful adaptation that stayed true to the book's queer relationships. By comparing how the same scenes from Anne Rice's Interview were adapted for film and television, like when Lestat feeds on Louis, Lestat turns Louis, and how their coffins are depicted, it becomes clear that the 1994 version never quite delivers on the homoeroticism teased between Lestat and Louis in the books. In the film, Lestat feeds on Louis twice. The first time Louis is bitten, he is lifted in the air by Lestat before being dropped into the sea below. A queer reading of this might initially consider this as a quasi-romantic take. After all, Louis is swept off his feet by Lestat. However, Lestat's callous treatment of Louis in the moment is a signal to audiences that this is not a budding gay romance, but an apex predator toying with its prey. On AMC's Interview, Lestat feeds on Louis many times. Each time, the act becomes increasingly sexualized, before finally there is no doubt that there is queer sexual tension and queer sex intertwined with the feedings. The next and final time the film version of Lestat feeds on Louis, he turns him into a vampire. This moment can absolutely be read queerly because the positioning of their bodies, their emotions and facial expressions, and the camera angles that show uh, Louis sucking Lestat from the wrist mimics the look and feel of gay sex. On television, Lestat's turning of Louis is clearly an early climax in their roller coaster queer relationship and is immediately followed by a scene where Louis' first vampire meal reveals his homosexuality undeniably, targeting a hunky sailor on shore leave from the Marines. When the television versions of Lestat and Louis return home, they share a coffin as if it were a bed and continue to sleep together even after they buy a second coffin. In the film, Lestat has a stable of coffins available, and the two never come close to sharing one. Another example of queer baiting. Centuries of colonialism, slave trading, and draining of resources built and maintained a socially constructed hierarchy in which whiteness was deemed superior to blackness. These same themes have dominated cinematic depictions of vampires for more than a century. In AMC's Interview series, whiteness, power, and knowledge are central to Lestat's ability to control and dominate his vampire lover, Louis, and their daughter, Claudia, who are both black. But like the power of whiteness, Lestat's power is only a social construct, which is destroyed by Claudia, who understands how to dismantle the systems keeping him in control. In this section, I'll discuss my analysis of scenes from Interview that demonstrate how Claudia uses Lestat's hegemonic whiteness against him to beat him at his own game. In the last two episodes of Interview's first season, Claudia and Louis begin to suspect and later confirm that Lestat has once again broken his promises to them, so they decide killing him is their only option. Claudia's mastery of chess becomes a metaphor for the skill and strategy that will be required to kill Lestat, who degrades her at every turn. Claudia decides to run away and pleads for Louis to join her, but he chooses Lestat over her. However, before long, Lestat finds her and commands her to return home. He warns her, "Back in your cage, sweetheart, because if you try this again, Claudia, I'll turn your bones to dust." This dynamic creates an asymmetrical relationship between them, where Lestat is capable of disproportionately imposing his will on her and setting conditions and exercising control. Compelled to spend time with Lestat, though, Claudia decides to beat him in his own game and calls out checkmate to his angry surprise. She knows she can take him then and tells Louis, who is still enthralled by Lestat's charms, "We're his slaves, and I will free us both. If you're going to beat Lestat, you have to become Lestat." Throughout Interview, Lestat's whiteness and status as maker of Louis and Claudia further separates him from them on hierarchies of power, which consider race, class, and in this case, vampire lineage or age, which increases ability. Lestat's whiteness and wealth afford him a sense of privacy and security that the two black vampires would struggle to find in an early 20th century New Orleans. Knowledge is another form of power that Lestat holds over them. The time and place that Lestat grew up in was around the same time that social Darwinism was gaining traction in the world and leading to the social construction of race as a determinant of superiority. Lestat underestimates Claudia's intelligence, possibly from his misguided belief that his whiteness makes him smarter. He limits what he shares about his vampire master and his ability to fly and read vampire thoughts. Claudia takes Lestat's power and turns it against him because she is superior to him, which he thought was impossible. The scene is especially impactful, considering the legacy of white supremacy that still permeates society and Claudia's repeated references to Lestat as her master. In spilling Lestat's blood, Claudia hopes some of the darkness in her undead existence will be lifted. So some concluding thoughts. The story of Lestat's vampire family has been told before, first in Anne Rice's 1977 novel and later in a 1994 film, both with casts of mostly white hetero characters. AMC's interview uses contemporary reframing to bring new social, racial, and gender dimensions to modern audiences who expect stories that do not shy away from defying our expectations in intersectional ways, like a Black teen vampire serial killer or a toxic queer interracial vampire couple. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, too. Really wonderful, thoughtful papers. I know, yep, we do have time for questions, so feel free if anyone has questions or insights to use the raise hand feature, or you can put your questions in the chat if you'd like to. Yes, definitely, yes. I think there's going to be a lot of rewatching of different things as a result of these papers, so it's wonderful. Let me see. Excellent. Okay, we do still have John.